Ok, c'est facile. Un, 2, 3.
Yeah, we'll do maybe the same.
Everything is under control.
They pour the water.
How many head of states have been said that everything is under control?
Under control.
They were lying.
J'en prie. Alors, je vais regarder.
Vas-y, allez,
Plus.
So greetings from Michelle Couton.
c'est ça en fait. J'ai enlevé mon masque, c'est plus simple.
Ça,
Ah ah.
c'est pas sur le bon.
En fait, j'ai oublié tout simplement, je...
Ça fait peut-être beaucoup de choses sur les oreilles.
Exactement.
Voilà.
Merci beaucoup.
Hmm.
Bien.
A moving table.
Moving table.
Spiritism.
No, not anymore.
Stuff will start happening.
Hacker,
Exactly.
hacker, are you there?
Fill the room.
Yes, we planned it. Actually,
There's
it's a
actually
horror.
a video that you haven't told us about.
What was the name of the Italian program where they would do scherzi a parte? No, I have a blackout. Where they would do jokes. Can't
Okay.
remember.
Like with hidden camera, this kind of
Yeah,
stuff?
exactly.
Oh, sure. Water in a box.
Thank you so much.
And the other ear.
The hot chocolate. It's warm
Oh, that's
here.
no nice. Thank you very much.
But I haven't got any milk. I don't know if one of you.
It's perfect like this.
Looks good. And here is the espresso.
They give
Thank
this.
you very much.
They give this in the Italian trains also.
This is us being
In
sustainable
a
and
box.
not using
Yeah, yeah.
plastic.
Okay. Well, Tetra Pak is here.
Do phones do everything to the connection? Yes. Okay.
Or at
I'll
least,
put this in
yeah,
flight
any
notes.
by
Do you have
Flat
No,
notes.
not because I just I took a photo of something that I maybe want to read, so I might just use my gallery
Yeah,
on
yeah,
the
no,
phone.
that's
Okay.
fine.
This is smarter than me phone. So, what I'm supposed to do, put it in
Should we agree
Shall I
Yes.
open
Yes,
this
please.
interesting discussion?
Please.
We're looking at each other. Who is going to start? So I guess the decorum is not visible for whoever is listening to us, but it's quite interesting to be in the underground of the museum. And my name is Stéphane Duguin. I'm the Chief Executive Officer for the Cyberpeace Institute in Geneva. I've been told to give some words of background. So I'll start like this. Quickly, civil servant for most of my career. With, I would say, after so many years, we can say an obsession of supporting victims of crime, and now the crime is in the cyberspace. So that's what I do for a living, and helping the most vulnerable against the worst of the attack. And I guess we can start with that.
Great. I'm Caterina Riva, and I am maybe the odd one out with the word we're discussing together tonight, which is hacker. So I'm gonna give a little autobiographical introduction. I'm currently the director of a museum in Termoli, southern Italy, called MACTE, Museo di Arte Contemporanea di Termoli. I've been there for a year. So yeah, with the challenges of what the last year has been. And before then, although I'm Italian, I worked and lived abroad. I was in Singapore for 2 years. I was working for the Institute of Contemporary Art Singapore, whose acronym is ICA. And it's really funny because if you do a quick Google search on ICA Singapore, it sends you to the link of the immigration authority. So, and I think also when I first arrived, I made a mistake of linking, I don't know, my social media to that, and then someone pointed out that I was redirecting maybe to where I didn't want to be. Also, those 2 years in Singapore, I have to say, really changed a little bit my outtake on how digital life has been changing everything, and in particular, trying to address how it's changing the production of artworks and how artists and curators work. Also, being in Singapore, I experienced firsthand a kind of, I guess, constrictive government and technological experiments being taken out on population. So that made me a little bit scared as a citizen of the world. And also, before Singapore, I spent 3 years in Auckland, New Zealand, as the director of a contemporary art space called Art Space, which again was a really interesting opportunity to encounter a very far away and very layered post-colonial community that taught me a lot about being elsewhere and working with different audiences and maybe challenging a bit our Eurocentric ways of thinking. And going back a little bit more in time, I studied and worked in London, where I did an MFA in curating at Goldsmiths. And at the same time, I opened a curatorial project space with 2 colleagues called Form Content. And we did projects there in real life, because I guess we had a website, but maybe things weren't as dematerialized as they seem to be now. So yeah, I mean, maybe before passing on, I just would like to say that maybe, yeah, I'm here also to learn and yeah, maybe bring my own kind of outsider look and perspective to the conversation.
Hi, my name is Patrice Wiemans. If Caterina is odd person out, I may be the odd person in, with emphasis on odd, because I'm supposed and considered to be a hacker. My background is very simple. I've been academic for the major part of my life. I'm a geographer, but I switched quite early from geography into the electronic networks, as it was called in the time, which became for the general public the internet, which is much older than many people believed, because many people would date the internet from the 90s and maybe even later. But anyway, I became internet and especially cultural and especially internet activist. And I've been part of many events, generally in a peripheral position, because I don't like to be at the top of things. I much prefer to be a kind of observer. But maybe the most important thing for now, since the theme is hacker, is that I might surprise people in the sense that I'm, as I often say, I'm a hacker, but I'm not a coder. And the most important point that I want to make, because it is, in my opinion, the beginning of a lot of misunderstanding. However, hackers are very much connected to information and communication technology, as it is called, or say the internet, the electronic networks, and the technology which supports it all. It's in my view, and in the view of I'm happy to say quite a number of hackers, connection to IT is neither necessary and especially not a sufficient condition to be a hacker. To be a hacker is a question of, again, in my view, of attitude, of habitus, of way of doing. And I will start the conversation with saying that the main characteristic of somebody who will be considered a hacker is to be curious. That curiosity is the most important thing. And a lot of things goes with it, with always keeping in mind that, as the proverb say, curiosity killed the cat.
Great. I wonder if we want to establish also maybe some kind of ground for what a hacker is, or if we want to jump in other directions. Because, yeah, there's kind of the standard definition, but I'm personally quite interested in the characterization, or should I say, of the mischaracterization of this figure. And maybe this kind of disembodied nature being one of the main points. And I wonder maybe if you can help me also understand maybe a basic difference between a hacker and a cracker, if there's like a different attitude, as you say, Patrice.
Well, when you are talking about misunderstanding, maybe the most important one, if in the olden days, quite early on, there was this make the differentiation between a hacker and a cracker. A hacker is a good person, or a white hacker. Cracker is a bad person doing bad things, which you are combating. And in my view, it's quite often, it's absurdly simple. A cracker is not a hacker. A hacker works according to the hacker ethics, which is quite well defined, and which says do no harm. In the beginning time of hacking, well, first maybe it's good to know that the word hack and hacking, which apparently, but I'm not very sure of that, but apparently originated in the MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, was just coding, was just about making computer works, which at that time was really a kind of pioneering activity, with very little you were creating knowledge as you were going. That had a very important feature, that knowledge was absolutely open. It was shared and it was open. And the internet came out of that, and one of the maybe most crucial problem of the internet as we know it today is this, you would almost say, original sin, that it was open and it's built to be open. And when all kind of bad things started to happen, of which crackers are part, but also the commercialization and financialization of the internet and trying to make things secret again, was always a kind of mending. Yeah, you can use all kind of metaphors like how you call it, soaping the floor with with a mop while there's a lot of water flying coming in. So hackers in the beginning was simply coding, and then it evolved. It evolved for a very important reason: is that MIT saw that this open knowledge closed in. It closed in for various reasons. The most important one being commercialization, and commerce is of course based, I think wrongly, but it's the way it works, on secrecy, on proprietary knowledge.
IPR.
You want to?
No. Just what you're saying on IPR. I mean, the basis of commerce, you have IPR. That's what it is.
Exactly. IPR is exactly what hackers are coming into. The second thing what hackers are doing is gaining access. If the thing is open, gaining access is easy. You just take access. But if it's closed, you have to gain access for some way or another, and there says the problem started. Hackers were gaining access illegally. Illegally because what they wanted to gain access to, networks, was closed. And then quite early in the beginning, kind of war, say, or conflict started to happen between hackers. Young people generally. At that time, hackers were really very young. I was with Dutch hackers since the beginning, almost the beginning. They started outside Amsterdam, which is quite remarkable in itself, because in the Netherlands everything is supposed to happen in Holland. In Holland everything is supposed to happen in Amsterdam, but they came from a bit north, and they were 15, something like 15, 16 when they came to the open and to Amsterdam, by the way, when they were something like 19, 20, and that's when I joined them, a bit by accident. And yeah, they interacted with their main goal was to gain access to networks which were closed, and at that time there were government networks, academic networks. Commercial came in there. That's also, I think, an important point, that commerce came into the internet relatively late. One of the things, Bill Gates is rumored to have said that the internet was a fad and it will pass away like so many things. Well, you see where we are now. So in the beginning it was all and when the Dutch hackers came into the network, they were combated for a part, but also admired by, and they got quite early access on agreement with the main academics network, and from there on, at least in the Netherlands, a kind of modus vivendi came into being. I am speaking of the very late 80s and early 90s, by the way. In Italy, for instance, things were completely different. Hackers from the beginning were seen as an evil force, and in Italy they were much more radical than they were, politically speaking, than they were in the Netherlands. So in Europe generally, you can, as far as hackers are concerned, you can make a difference between the north and the south, in the sense that the south was early militant and got into really severe repression from the state, whether in the north a kind of compromise evolved. In the Netherlands, especially because we had in the Netherlands very early computer criminality laws, and the hackers profiled themselves as a social movement. By profiling themselves as a social movement, they became a bit inattackable. You don't touch social movement. Social movements are okay. So, as long as they were not engaging in criminality, that was quite all right. To come back to this, to what are hackers doing? there are several stages. You have hackers doing, for instance, acting like criminal hackers in the help of making systems secure. This is a very positive, quite often not very much knowledge. Very difficult to add knowledge because unless they have been hired in by the institution, company or government or whatever, indeed to probe their network for failures, for how you call it, for
Vulnerabilities.
exactly vulnerabilities. If they do it by themselves and then signal to the instances that they have this and that vulnerability. Nowadays there is some kind of protocol for that, but in the early days it was really kind of, oh, bad weather is coming, let's smash the barometer. Or this messenger is telling me my armies have been smashed up, let's kill the messenger. And so a lot of difficulties arose of that. And then, yes, you have the whole, and that was quite a few words Lara, the artist, suggested: phishing, spam, random ransomware, and so. I'm not really, to put it bluntly, I'm not very interested in that. That's not hacker activity for me. That's criminal activity, making use of computers with having a knowledge which is unfortunately the same as what real hackers have, knowledge of system. I'm much more interested in that position of the knowledge, because one of the major aspects of being a hacker, and that's not only for IT, it's for technology in general and for knowledge in general. Hacker is someone who is in the possession of an illegal, or let me say unauthorized knowledge. In a certain sense, we are back in the Egyptian times. The high priest have the knowledge, they are authorized to have it. Anyone else who has this knowledge is by definition criminal. And I like to stop at that.
Yeah.
I mean, you said a lot, and that's very interesting. I'll start with the end when you said knowledge. I mean, that's to me, hacking, at least how I understand this, and I guess how the vast majority of people looking at the topic understand this. First, there's no negative connotation to the word, and that's it's too bad that now it's become a bit more vulgar through article via bad description of event that hackers are described, when in fact we're talking about criminals. But for me, there's nothing to do with hacking. To me, hacking is really something that's about knowledge, that is about empowerment of citizens to understand the system they interact with. It's like we are interacting with a system, we are interacting with an ecosystem. We should be, as human beings, in capacity to understand what is happening, how it works, and if it doesn't work to our interest, to make it better. And that was really at the source of the philosophy, because it's really going towards the philosophy, the hacking. It's a way of life, the way of seeing your environment, the way of being critic about your environment. To me, linked to hacking, there's a lot of high sense of self-critic, defense against manipulation, defense against factory of information that is trying to make you act in a way that you don't even know why you're acting like this. So hacking is about, going against that. So keeping your brain up and trying to look into the cracks in between the code. Something that you said, and I absolutely subscribe to this, then whatever else you do, using a computer, using a knife, using a car, using a bomb, using whatever, it's crime. But there's nothing to do with hacking. So that would be the same that you would say that, I don't know, a race driver is a nice person when he's driving a race, and when someone is using a car, to break the rules on the road, suddenly it's a criminal, and then we have to define this, and because the car is the same car. No, this doesn't make any sense. Something that you mentioned also about power, you didn't mention power, but it led me to think about power and knowledge, because I don't remember who it was. I think it was Zimmerman, but help me there. I don't want to say nonsense, but if people are listening to us, they will correct. I think it was Zimmerman who, the first time, put in place the PGP, And at the moment where this was known from his friend, from his network, they told him, watch out, because for sure the FBI is going to come on you, because what you're doing now is nothing illegal, but because you're doing it and it was supposed to be something that was owned by the states, says who? The states. Then something is going to happen to you. And yeah, no surprise, the FBI came there. When today, decades after that, encryption is at the basis of all the services that we have on the internet. Without encryption, we cannot secure the exchange in finance, we cannot secure the... I mean, I don't have to explain why it's so important. So it's also a question of momentum. And if at that time, that person with the hacker philosophy, state of mind and approach would not, go into the boundaries of, I want to make sure that encryption become a public good, then maybe it would never have been, happening for the vast majority of us. So at some point you need to play, as you were saying, with the boundary, with the rules, and to be there. But if you do this for knowledge, if it's transparent, if it's open, if it's really for the common good, if you don't do this for ego, and to prove that you're better than the system and you want to beat something, because sometimes it also can go there. And as long as we don't mix this with crime, and it's quite easy to define crime. So maybe it's more complicated to define hacking, but it's very easy to define crime. So maybe it's it's easier to go there. That's where we'd at least see the. That's where I see this in my mind construct, the hacking.
The interesting point about encryption is that you first had a stage where you were fighting for the right to encrypt. And nowadays we have the stage, which basically in my mind came in after 9/11. You have to fight for the right to decrypt.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk about this, but it's so. I mean, this is. You opened a lot of very good conversations. So there's one about encryption. There's one about vulnerability scanning and bug bounty. When in some countries, if you do this, you're still criminalized, and you even have to have the permission to make sure that you're going to detect a vulnerability in a system that, if it exploits, is going to trigger the mass surveillance of millions of people. And because you're looking into that, you need to ask, sorry, can I have the permission, please? Don't put me in jail. So it's kind of a crazy situation. Encryption is the same. I mean, but okay, we can discuss about this afterwards, but happy to come back to it.
I think there are so many interesting things on the table. I'm really interested as well in this question of ethics that I think you also are both really interested in. And maybe one way we can go about this is also open a more like a geopolitical kind of landscape, because I realize we often make the mistake of thinking as, one word, one internet, but things do change quite drastically depending on which point of view you look at them from. And I'm also thinking of kind of very like simple artistic examples as well, like Aaron Schwartz. I'm sure you're familiar with his name. Was commissioned when he was still alive to propose an artwork with another New York-based artist called Tarin Simon, and they came up with this quite interesting index of the same word, how it's visualized on browsers in different places. So let's say the word peace. I don't know, I don't have the visual reference on me now, but for example, is a dove with an olive branch in one country, and it's a woman with a flag in another one, depending on religious, gender rules, etc. The other aspect I'm super interested in, and to me is a crux in this discussion, and why I'm kind of interested in also this kind of digital surveillance, what's happening to us, is this idea of obfuscation. And to me, power lies with the ones that know how to use certain things, and all the rest of us are left with clicking blindly on cookies because we're too tired to read the fine prints. And that's how, things are gradually taken away from our understanding and our knowledge. Because, you can think something and name it, but also you can make stuff happening without most of the people understanding how it works. And maybe yeah, last but not least, another thing I'm really interested in is this idea of the body, and how when we try to imagine what a hacker is or does, is we never think about the social movement or a person trying to do something. It's always looked at through the lens of data and money, or something quantifiable, or at least that's the way I think about this, and maybe also the way it's wrongly portrayed in media. And going back to what you were mentioning about Lara Favaretto, the artist that invited us and whose project these Clandestine talks are, she sent us a series of images to kind of inspire us or for us to consider, and they were very loose and maybe not necessarily linkable to this idea of hacker, but there was one that to me was kind of interesting, and it was this man whose face you couldn't see and had like a jacket over his head, as if he didn't have a head, and yeah, headless for some reason. And yeah, I'm just gonna put it out there.
Sounds like the idea of a hacker in, say, in the mainstream media.
I know, yeah.
That guy with the hoodie, that,
Yeah, Mr.
that
Robot.
is the one. That is the one doing the bad thing all over the world. Yeah. Interesting figure for sure. I mean, while we think this is the hacker, it gives a lot of space for the entities that are really doing a big harm on the internet to be unchecked. I mean, it's easier, you know, to give a scapegoat, easily identified, more or less young, more or less, you know, marginal, and that's the person that is the threat of the internet.
That's on almost maybe a meta level. That's the whole problem of unauthorized knowledge. The holder of an unauthorized knowledge is going to be the scapegoat, because the holder of the unauthorized knowledge is not doing what the ones with the authorized knowledge are doing, and that is where the harm is. And you are completely right to say that the ones doing the most harm to the internet or to society in general,
the population, exactly.
To society in general is I mean, it's very necessary to take a lot of our conversation out of IT, out of the technology, to project it to society to society in general. And one of the main mover of that is, of course, but naming it is immediately killing the conversation almost, is to speak out the C word for capitalism.
Yeah, that's true. No, it's very true. So just to react on something that you were just saying, why, I mean, on a personal level, I've been interested to join and lead the Cyber Peace Institute. It was because of cyber peace. It was not cyber security institute. You know, it's not about securing the computers and the network, etc. That's okay. It's important, but it's not what I would strive for. What's interesting here is to say this internet, this cyberspace, what I want to call it, this kind of mental construct, because it doesn't really exist, in fact, it's just a mean to an end. And the end is the safety, the security, the dignity, the equity of human beings, you know, in whatever they do. And what they do can be very critical. I mean, without a secure cyberspace today, you don't have access to water. You don't have access to food. You don't have access to healthcare. You can't discuss. You can't get knowledge. And you were saying it depends on the region of the world where you are in the countries. This has a specific meaning if you're in the Western world, because everything is digitized and you click and something happens, like the magic, you know, of 3 centuries ago. But if you're other part of the world and you want to access this, it's not via the internet that you're going to access it. Yeah, exactly. You're going to access it via capitalist services that are going to pretend to be the internet. And that's problematic.
It is very one of the most shocking things, and I admit that I did not realize that, because it's and then I was in development studies. Can you imagine? But you're absolutely right in saying that we have to. What you said, that we have to look at other parts of the world. When I read that the failure of Facebook, which was a few days ago, if I'm not mistaken, put us users of Facebook, I'm not, but into inconvenience. But it was a lifeline via WhatsApp. It was a lifeline for people.
You mean when it stopped
Yeah.
for well,
And that was absolutely shocking on two planes. It's a scandal that a failure of Facebook put people into real life difficulties. But it's also a scandal that it has come to that. Why is it that people have become so dependent on proprietary technologies, which are not made for their interest in mind, but only to make money out of it? By the way, I never understood how you can make money by giving free services to people who have no cash anyway. But it's completely another point. That's my own naivety and unknowledge. But we have used the term proprietary knowledge is bad in itself at that level. That's one of the things we should combat. But yeah, what's one of my problems? You are in Stefan is in a better position than I am, because at least he has a focused an institution who is focusing on something quite precise, even if it's very wide. But if you are like me, an observer of what's going on in general, you have looking at files all over the place, and then I'm not even talking about the general clusterfuck our society is in. Climate? Anyone?
goes back to the big C also, this one. Would you like, Stefan, to tell us a bit more about the Cyber Peace project? I really like this title, and I was also thinking so much of, how usually these conversations are framed are about binaries, and maybe, a good way of trying to move past this is, enlarging the terminology and from a very negative space, bring it to something, potentially positive. And I was imagining, War and Peace, the novel. You're the cyber piece of that equation. Maybe, to tell us more about how you got there. And
No, pleasure. With something that you said before, in fact, was interesting. When I joined, it was before that. It was in my year in Europol. I was before in Europol. I was program manager to create and then be chief of staff for the European Cybercrime Center. And then I created and led the unit that was anti-Daesh and Al-Qaeda propaganda online, in between Charlie Hebdo and Bataclan, when it was really like something. Yeah, it was quite tragic. And despite the fact that all of this is happening and is impacting human beings, it's a fact. I guess everyone knows, or at least everyone has the the hint of it. I was thinking of your search, that you do in different parts of the world. If today you make a search and you take the big names of the big cyber attacks, so you take WannaCry, NotPetya, Kaseya, SolarWinds. First, you need to know what they are. So it's already in a cluster of knowledge. So you need to be a bit informed to understand that you could be a victim of something you don't even know the name of. Okay, so let's start with that. But imagine that you put that in Google, in Bing, wherever, DuckDuckGo. And what you're going to see, images are images of computer. You will see figures. You will see like numbers of cache that has been stored, etc. What you will not see ever is the face of someone. As if this is computer fighting computers. It's the network hitting the network. And this is so non-humanized as a problem. So how can we hope to design human-centric solutions? And that's really what decided me to join the institute, because it was a practical vehicle to implement human-centric solution towards vulnerable communities. The one with what we do is we provide assistance to the one with the least capacity to defend themselves against the one that have money, time, incentive, network to attack. So, and when the asymmetry is at the worst, that's where we enter into play. And for example, we specialized ourselves in helping NGOs. So NGOs in the humanitarian sector, where their mission is sensitive, their field of action is sensitive, their data is super sensitive, their beneficiaries is super sensitive, and their cybersecurity level is very, very low. And criminals knows that, state actors knows that, but there was really no one ready to defend them. So that's where we want to spend our resources and try to make a difference, but not only to have like transactional help, because it's nice to help people. I mean, it's what you need to do, but the whole idea is how the knowledge that you generate from that help. What are the cracks? What are the vulnerabilities? Who are the real actors? Who are the real threats? He's not that guy that everyone is looking for with his hoodie in his basement. That's not this one. So it's state actors, it's the hybridation between criminal groups and state actors. These are the real threats. And how do we make sure that states, when they discuss about norms and law and regulation, when they pave the way of the future of you, me, or cyberspace, the one for the future generation, how do they understand where the real threat is? But not, starting to put text, a treaty, on the basis of, oh, no, but we know who is the cyber criminal. He's the hacker, He's the one that doesn't like the black box. He's the one that is not happy and okay and smiling when he's clicking, and scrolling down with algorithm. He or she has no clue how they work. And I guess we can be a bit more ambitious for all of us.
Yeah, and
when
maybe
we
it's about
interact.
also turning the lens and showing the effects or the people affected by this rather than the supposed kind of culprit. Maybe also, maybe this might help in my mind is getting less abstract and maybe, I don't know, lead by examples. So I don't know if you want to share also, I don't know, real events or... And sorry, just wanted to add something because you were mentioning when there was a big freeze of the social media, and I think again it's very layered conversation, and I think as people in the West with a certain level of education and access to things, we can decide to log off Facebook. But for most people, they use WhatsApp is a survival. Is like it's talking to their family back in Africa when they live and work in Europe or elsewhere, and it's a tool. So they don't even question, what's behind it. So yeah.
By the way, I find that very problematic. That we have landed in a situation like that. I would just like to come back to what you said about when governments are enacting rules and etc. One of the biggest problem I think is that the very limited, sometimes non-existent knowledge of rule makers, of decision takers, of how the technology works. The technology has come, in fact, completely out of control. And one of my main contention, and it has at least lateral connection to people using WhatsApp in quote-unquote developing countries. That is that technology has escaped even, I think, in some instances, the control of the people developing it and using it. It's a bit, I see a bit of a parallel with the financial crisis. When the financial crisis happened in 2008, diagnostics were about how could it come and so, and then one discovered that a lot of things, a lot of financial instruments were not even understood, and vehicles were not even understood by the people who were acting on them. It was a kind of rush forward, and IT information technology, in my view, has gone the same way. So there's also a big problem there. So empowering people is probably not enough in empowering for the situation we have now. We might also be thinking about reversing the situation in the sense that the technology, as it exists now, has become really a bit too complicated. You cannot simplify technology to the utmost limit. One of the examples I have is that my friend and now disappeared Arjen Kamphuis who was an expert in internet in security and in encryption, and was really propagating the use of encryption by vulnerable people, in his case more in the West, so it were journalists, human rights advocates and people like that. But propagating this encryption for everyone, there was one big problem, is that you cannot simplify encryption endlessly. But the average user will not understand it up to even the minimum level that you have to understand it. So you have a gap between the absolute minimum you can reach in complexity, understandable complexity of encryption, and the maximum average knowledge of the majority of the user. And that gap for the time being is unbridgeable. And that is something that you will see in many instances. And
but the gap is getting larger.
That I cannot say. That
Okay.
I found the image good enough to without the need to quantify it. It's of course very important to know whether the gap is widening or diminishing, because especially if it diminishes, then you can hope that you reach a point that security for everybody, the end of vulnerability, the end of the problems that have vulnerable peoples and communities, which you are addressing, which Stéphane is addressing, can be closed. If it is augmenting, which might very well be the case, well, yes.
Yeah, again,
good luck.
it depends from which perspective
But
you're looking at this, from the big C corporations or the people, a certain group.
But what you were saying before in terms of the lack of digital literacy in the policy maker sphere, it's very true. It's very, very true. I mean, in my years in Europol or now in work with the Cyber Peace Institutes, I spent and we spend a lot of time providing knowledge to policymakers. And it's not about position, or it's about the basic knowledge. You know, the keys that you need to have to understand the technology, the topic that you've been presented. And that's quite tough. Also because especially in policymaking, the knowledge is not existing in a vacuum. It's existing in a context of an organization. Yes. The way government are organized is putting a frame on what they are supposed to understand, what they are not supposed to understand. The topic they are supposed to look into and are not supposed to look into. There are silos that are existing there for decades, and you will never. Very recent example. You wanted example. So you have discussion at United Nations on cybersecurity. So you have groups, United Nations groups, 2 of them already. So it's interesting. Open-ended working group and group of experts. Okay, let's go beyond the acronyms. United Nations discussion to discuss about norms and regulation in the cyberspace for responsible behavior. You park that. Then you have another initiative with the UN Cybercrime Treaty, where this is about the future of how to understand cybercrime and how to fight cybercrime. It's not the same group. And when you discuss with Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I'm doing this a lot, telling to them at the end of the day, behind, this is the same internet, this is the same cables. What you need to learn is more important, is the difference between the lower level of the internet, when you're really close to the cable, almost at electrical level, and when you're in the content that is passing by the pipelines. Because then suddenly it's a different topics that you organize yourself alongside this would make sense. But that by default you consider that this is me, and we never work together, and that's the way it is. And because you organize like this, you frame the topic, and you absolutely blind to the reality of the technology, what it says. Then there's an issue. The second gap, you were asking another example, is this reflex, especially by government, that someone needs to be responsible. Point me to the responsible community. Is that the industry? Is this the criminals? Is this another state? Who should I investigate? And let's take the example of deepfakes. So I was still in Europol at the time, end of 2017, when deepfakes become a bit mainstream. How it became mainstream? It's not that there was a company behind. There was no state behind. What happened is that suddenly there was the free thing that you need to create deepfakes. TensorFlow, so machine learning algorithm, was for free, open source on the internet. The availability of personal data with faces on the internet was enormous. You could download half of Facebook, Instagram, whatever you wanted to do. And the processing power that you need to train your algorithm was super cheap for the first time. And then all of this was put together by a community of people that did not even know each other. And in 3 weeks, they create deepfakes. Technology. And this is one of the biggest threats that you have to democracy these days. If you cannot trust, and something that you said before in terms of, what this construct in between all people with internet is on the basis of trust. If people cannot understand every day the encryption, at least they need to trust that someone understands, and they can trust that someone to safeguard their interest. And if suddenly you cannot trust, what is presented to you via a screen, via whatever, that's problematic. And there was no responsible behind. It's because you were mentioning it before, Patrice, the technology is moving so fast, and more importantly, the convergence of different technology is hitting and booming in a way that no one can really predict what is going to happen next. And for policymakers, that's siderating. They are like frozen. What I'm going to do, you tell me that what I learned is useless to what is going to happen because it's exponential rise of technology. No one can plan exponentially. I know what happened the last 5 years. I can plan 5 years ahead normally. Now the world doesn't work like this. So it's complicated.
And the politicians, you said they were they froze. They have, how do you say in English, démissionné?
Quit.
They've quit. They've quit long time ago. One of the interesting thing about the internet, especially if you come from French culture, French history, is that it's the first technology which has been completely left to the private parties. It was developed at some stage, of course. It was developed by the state, but by the moment was developed in the United States, was developed in France also, in other countries. But when it became really large scale, and I could observe that in the Netherlands, the government declined, quit.
Yeah.
That happened in the early 90s when we were doing in Amsterdam the digital city. We said, well, this is going to grow. We would need more government. We would need more government intervention and financing, of course. And the answer of the government was, no, we are going to give it all to the private parties. Let the market, which is the shorthand for corporations, let the market lead the way. And from there on, well, the rest is history in a certain sense.
Yeah,
and that's why I say this quitting of the government, and you can spend a lot of time to explain to politicians and decision makers how it works and so. I'm afraid it's deliberate, probably at an unconscious level. But as you say, yeah, it's too complicated. We quit. And there's something, again, we step now out of technology and go into general politics. That's a characteristic of the modern state. The modern state does not care anymore. It does not want to handle these things. One of my many asides is that I'm a public transport interest. It's far too complicated. We don't want to let the market do it. And I mean, nobody forces you to go into the tram. Of course, you have in Luxembourg, you have a fantastic system. But in general, it's a kind of, yeah. In the olden days, we were responsible for it. When it went well, we never got any compliment. When it worked bad, questions in parliaments. Now it's easy. Trains are not working. Well, company is responsible. And as you said, let's look where are let's search for the responsible, and let's make sure it's not us.
And it's not impossible, just to complement on this. Sometimes policymakers, they can be ambitious. Sometimes they don't know that they're ambitious, to be honest. Look at GDPR. This is a fact that at the very beginning of GDPR, the EU did not realize what it was going to do globally. And
let me just explain GDPR.
So GDPR is the Global Data Protection, the General Data Protection Regulation, which is created from the EU, but in fact now pushes anyone processing personal data on the internet to set up some basic rules in order to protect the owner of this personal data. I mean, it's kind of a shortcut, but that's something like this. And because of something coming from the EU, all the companies in the world had to change their processes, their business model, their notification. Okay, there's another debate to say, is this in the end effective or not? This we can discuss. But it really changed the way companies had to do business. And on the basis of something that was purely ethical. It was about ethics. People needs to be in capacity to control their personal data. And now the EU is doing the Digital Service Act, which I think is going to have a similar effect because it's on the content level. So it's something about no content moderation, what can be on the platform, what cannot be, right of recourse, takedown of content. It's and again, I mean, this content is not living somewhere; it's just passing by all over the cables of the internet. So
Yeah, I mean, don't want to justify anyone, but I just also think there are different speeds to these things, and technology is moving at a much faster pace than protocols or democracy can keep up with. And also this idea of trust, I think that has been really exploited by big corporations that made a lot of money, like harvesting all of our data until someone told them, hey, wait a minute, really telling us, trust us, we know what we are doing, and no one maybe not even understanding really what was going on. I mean, the great majority of people then, of course.
by the way, that someone saying, hey, what's going on, that you're mentioning, is a hacker.
Yep.
That's exactly what hacking is about.
Yep.
To me, Cambridge Analytica, it's investigative journalism, but hacker is in some sort an investigative journalist of the internet. He's asking the question, putting the fingers, and saying, okay, what's happening here?
With various consequences and a various degree of success. And unfortunately, the balance is there are some good developments, but I'm a bit pessimistic because there have been in recent years major disclosures which were of the caliber that you would say, well, no, things are going to change. But there's a parallel with the COVID situation, which put a complete brake on the economy, and suddenly people realized, well, we now have clean air, and now pace of life has slowed down. Maybe we should really change. Well, at the moment we are a few percent still lower than the emissions we did in 2019. So we are back to normal, quote unquote. And with these disclosures, the last big one, it was not even the last, there is one that had just come now, but I can't recall it exactly. But say the last for me was a really major break, the major disclosure was Snowden. And that's when Snowden happened, I had really kind of idea, okay, we have always thought it was like that, but now we know. And there's really a difference between thinking, where you are pretty sure, what's called in Dutch probability, which is very, very, very close to surety, to be absolutely sure of it. And but now you are absolutely sure it's out, and things will change. No, nothing changed. And it's even getting worse. So my question would be, maybe it's kind of allow it or not allow it, turn of the discussion. But is it maybe not time to put a brake on technology?
Ooh.
Or do we have to accept that, yeah, things are like they are? It's, I mean, we have to live with it, and we have to live with Facebook till it dies itself. Or it gets in the metaverse, or
Exactly.
or what?
Transforms.
Or is it, or can we not put a brake to it? And that is within the circles I am in. It's a major discussion and bone of contention, and it's called degrowth, la décroissance in French. And I am, as I was in its time, a fervent advocate of free and open source software. And I'm now an advocate for décroissance, but for degrowth. And degrowth means also technological degrowth, in the sense that you can empower people in using technology to a far larger extent than you can now, and making it possible for them to use technology, to use IT, but at a lower level than the technology that we have as it is being deployed and exploited by big corporations, and can be only by big corporations. So at some stage, I was very much into the discussion about free Wi-Fi. And free Wi-Fi, that means community-owned and community-run Wi-Fi. There have been a lot of well, it started as experiments, and it's still ongoing. One is in Denmark, one is in Catalonia, and they work very well. People are connected, Wi-Fi is functioning, they have communication, but there's a little problem. YouTube is not going to pass it, not enough bandwidth for it. What do you want? What do you want, both as community, as people, or what do you want as, say, at government level? And at government level, I'm very afraid that in some instance, they will, and it happens in the United States, they will actually forbid it. They will actually forbid non-commercial, meaning non-corporate application of technology.
I wonder if there's like an in-between in this binary of degrowth and like the protocols that implement barriers or frontiers that try to regulate something that keeps molding and changing.
I mean, I don't pretend that I have the answer there, because it's a very, very fair question, a very complicated one. What I do know is there's no way that that regulation can technically regulate technology. No. This I don't believe into it. We saw that because technology is evolving in a way that no one even is in capacity to predict now, because of convergence and exponential growth. So. So this I don't believe into technical limitation, like a boundary in which technology is going to thrive and it cannot go beyond this. That I don't believe it. But I do believe that regulators have a responsibility of at least promoting values at minima. It works, it doesn't work, history will tell. But their roles there is to protect the population on the values that are the cement of this democracy of this state. Here I'm talking, democracies, EU, because this is where really you have this beacon of a bit of knowledge and hope to be a bit ambitious, on rules and regulations in the cyberspace. So this should be pushed way more and being way more ambitious, and then from there you can assess if this is working or not, but at least to reach that point. Because otherwise, we are going to continue to say, oh, you know what, it's impossible. At the same time, no one is really going to try to stop it. So it's just going to boom exponentially, and you're going to have companies becoming the internet. And we're mentioning Facebook several times. In some part of the world, for them, internet is Facebook. And tomorrow, when the metaverse is going to be out there, the internet is going to be the metaverse.
Or it will fail.
But you see what I mean. That's like the same kind of logic. Yeah, the same way when they wanted to send their own currency, and then suddenly... And let's take the example of Libra. So when Facebook wanted to put Libra out there, it's an interesting one, because they could secure partnership with quite big financial companies. So they had like this, this backup of the industry. And then they hit a hiccup that they haven't seen coming, because, Facebook, and anything can go, is that states woke up and say, wait. Isn't that the sole role of state to create money? And that's really interesting, because at the same time cryptocurrency were out, except that with crypto there's no state behind, there's no Facebook behind, there's no entity behind. So you cannot really say, who is behind making Bitcoin and Ethereum? It's the community. So it's very difficult to regulate. But then suddenly there was a face, there was a name that was going to create money outside of state, and then suddenly state woke up. So it's not absolutely impossible. I would say ambitious regulation. And reading the world today, it's EU should lead. Sadly enough, it looks like EU is not in the strength to lead, and that's not great. Because otherwise, something that we discussed about since the beginning, hacking. For hacking to exist and to work, it's deeply linked to the existing infrastructure of the internet, how the internet works. There's now there's now, as we speak, initiative from states to change the deeper nature of the internet, to transform this into a centralized system controlled by states. And it's not a hypothesis that it could be like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, people saying, nah, it's impossible, they will never change, you know, they want to do this technically, it's impossible. It is very possible. And if that happens, then this is the root of everything else. Then you change how people, you know, connect with each other.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny because that stage where the states, according to you, and I agree with you, was the stage in the very beginning of the internet, and ITU, the International Telegraph or Telecommunication Union, wanted to keep control and failed to keep control. I think, because of passive or active US government intervention. We wanted to keep the internet American. But the funny thing is that in those days, we, people who were for a free internet, were supporting, objectively, were supporting the US government and ICANN in this. And now we are back to it. I think what you just described made me think, okay, that is plan A. Plan A is, as you say, the European Union kicking into action, doing something. Do we have a plan B?
We are living plan B. That's the problem.
We are
in plan B every day, because no one has the ambition to do a plan A, plan A, B, plan whatever. There's no plan.
Okay, so let's call plan C that is. What is plan C?
Yeah, true.
Plan C would be that people take power, that the users would be also the producers. I call them the producer, but what I want to say is that the things are owned and run and if possible developed, by the way. No, not if possible, necessary, have to be developed by the community, by the people. Is there any chance to that?
But which means that you need states to invest into digital literacy for their population.
Yeah.
You need states to trust their people,
But
and
also
to give them a lot of knowledge so that they can become really this digital citizen, enlightened, understanding the technology, and with the capacity to self-critically decide, I'm using this app, I'm not using that one. In fact, I'm using no apps because I don't need apps, and I can go back, to the structure of the internet. But this is an effort of states providing a lot of knowledge for citizens to become something else than consumers.
And that will kill the business model of corporates.
Yeah, because I think these values that maybe you're talking about, they are not shared. And I think when you talk about, the free internet and an open system, I think that was an idea that has been completely lost. And if internet was ever a public space, now is a completely private one. And I think also people engage as individuals, like community spaces are no longer there. So I think it really requires a whole new system.
And it's also nuance, I guess, because you cannot hope that state is going to be responsible, for the whole stack, up to the application, down to the technologies.
Yeah.
I mean, the private sector will always have a role there. Just a question of, if okay, I'm not talking about the degrowth option. I'm talking about there's a regulation. There's a clear empowerment of people, to understand what they do and understand the ecosystem, becoming empowered. But there's still, I guess, an industry behind that is providing, some sort of tools or others, because not everyone will be in capacity or having the time or the appetite to develop their own tools to be, within the open source. I mean, we saw that. But these companies can really well, and they show that they could be the two rules with GDPR, go back to GDPR, could really well, operate in a framework that will be, properly regulated. Now the problem is that this is not there.
Yeah,
it's self-regulation. There's so much call for self-regulation. I mean, we saw what self-regulation was doing in the financial crisis. That's what you're mentioning.
Well, that has a lot to do, because the kind of companies, and I completely agree with you, the kind of companies who could do that will, by definition, not be big monopolistic companies. There will be small community, local companies federating, so sharing the knowledge, not that everyone develop the wheel or reinvent the wheels in so. But what you were using the word private, huh? Maybe it's private has a good connotation, and refers to individuals. It's maybe I think it's a kind of discussion. It's better to always use the word corporate. Corporate versus this. It's not public versus private. It's public versus corporate. And yeah, that the kind of regulation you are proposing is so much against the interest of corporates that, also given the osmosis often between government and at the personal level between government and corporates, I'm not very hopeful about that. So
No, I'm not saying it's going to happen tomorrow. No, for sure. At the
no,
same
but how can we make it happen? Yeah, I'm not demanding an answer.
No. I get that. We go back to trust. First we go back to staying ambitious. And there was a report yesterday in Switzerland from the National Center for Cybercrime about the fact that crime is on the rise, cybercrime, etc. Everything is bad. So, and yeah, factually speaking, it's worse than it was. And but it's exactly the time not to be, okay, nothing works. What are we going to do? In the contrary, and I was thinking about the situation. To be honest, all the tools are there. That's the worst. That's the worst. The tools are there. It's just that they are not used because, again, and I'm pushing a lot of responsibility on states. Corporations have a lot of responsibility too, but in this case, it's states. I mean, states are there, to lead the way. And to say that all the tools that we have, at least let's use them, to the bone. And then if they don't work, then we see if we need something else. You were mentioning, this speed of technology, etc. We're saying that criminality and abuse are evolving at the speed of light, and we are not even replying at the speed of law. So we have laws. We're not even there.
But then if you say that, but I hope I'm not sliding down into the conspiracy sphere. But when you say that, the impression gains ground that it's somewhere, it's deliberate. And that deliberate is not, I will always say, it's not at the conscious level. But it's at the unconscious level, it's somewhere in the DNA of political power. We were discussing power coming in and out. That's interesting. Maybe we have to come back to that. Before coming back to that, I would talk about trust, because trust is indeed so essential. But in what kind of at the moment, in what kind of system are we living? We are living, in fact, in a trustless system. And why? Because the impression has gained ground that trust, which is a basically human thing, it's maybe an it's maybe not. It is an essential human characteristic. Trust cannot be trusted, and we have walked into a situation of trustlessness, which is the world of machines, and that has a very long history. And that history has been one of the authors, to me, who has explained that is Manuel de Landa in a book which is called War in the Age of Intelligent Machines. In that book, Manuel de Landa explains that very early on in the United States, in the, say, structuration of the United States in the years after the War of Independence, so we are talking first half of the 19th century, the idea gained ground that when you had the chain of decisions, of processes, the weakest element in the chain was the human, and that had to be taken out of the chain and replaced by protocols, by rules. And nowadays, these protocols and rules are enforced by machines. And then you get a whole situation that the trust is taken out, and it's a basic philosophy of cryptocurrencies, is to take the human out and replace it by algorithm, what I would call, or what I not, but many people will call algorithmic trust. Called you don't need to trust humans because the protocols enforced by the machines will do the work. Once you are in that, you are out of political decision making. So if you have a system like ours now, where a lot of things, look around you, it's not only technological, a lot of things is based on pre-established rules and post-happening certification. Yeah, to me, you are lost. And I've seen this in so many times. I mean, I was academic, but I was a kind of maverick academic because I never went into all kind of things. Which one of the things of an academic, establishing the credential of an academic is a CV. I never had a proper CV. I don't have a bio. I don't have what I wrote. I don't know what I wrote. But this is completely so it doesn't any longer work like that. It did work in the time that you had human trust, because people knew you, and that was sufficient. I remember in I'm sorry if I'm talking in all kind. I see you frowning.
No, I'm with you.
Yeah,
I'm with you.
I'm there too.
In the olden days, to obtain a passport in the United Kingdom, in Great Britain, the only thing you had to do is to provide a photograph and have that photograph signed by your local member of parliament. You went to your local member of parliament, speak, what you call the surgery, appointment time, what's called spreekuur. Anyway, and oh yeah, you're Mr. Smith. Yeah, fine. Oh yeah, okay. Sign you. Went sent to the passport office. You got your passport under. Why? Because it was trust, and it worked. That's a fantastic thing of I had another example, which is really, I think this is a very good example of how human trust and honesty works. Ethics is that in the High Court of Scotland, all judges have a pigeonhole where the lawyers of the conflicting parties put their brief, their arguments, what they are going to say to the judge. So you have in the same pigeonhole, reachable from outside, you have the argument of party A and party B. Now you immediately understand that party B would really much like to know what party A is going to say. Well, lawyers of both parties, they would not even think of taking it out and looking at. And that is a form of trust that has disappeared nowadays.
But I guess also because you take the human out of it.
Because you take the human
so
out,
I don't think you can apply the word trust to algorithms. I think it's a cop-out. People don't trust algorithms. They just let them do their thing and never question. So I think philosophically, we have to go back to this idea of ethics and responsibility that you can only apply to people or people that take on that, in my mind.
Yeah.
I don't know if you agree.
Yeah, no, I do. Just reflecting on what you're saying, if you put trust and algorithm in the same conversation and how it relates to hacking and understanding the system, I go back to hacking for understanding the system, how it works, for the sake of improvement of the common good. If we consider that algorithm replace law, because when you code some rules, that becomes, that gives you an environment, you can only operate in these rules, and these rules are managed by an algorithm. De facto, this algorithm is the law.
Yeah, code is law.
Yeah.
That's a famous book by Lawrence, not Lang, but the other.
I don't remember.
The man from Copyright Commons, CC. Okay.
I don't remember. But I mean that's the idea. So suddenly it becomes the law. If you don't have hacking activities to scrutinize this algorithm, to understand how it works, to look into the core of the algorithm and there's no bias, because algorithm at the end of the day is not coded by machines. even if that one was coded by a machine, before that one it had been coded by a human at some point, and on the basis of a decision making that was, human related. So it's not that because you put human out of the loop, that human was really out of the loop. There was something somewhere. And we saw this scandal, with face recognition not so long ago, in terms of the facial recognition algorithm was not incapacity to recognize. It was more incapacity to recognize a white male rather than a white female, and it was between white female and black female. Then it was absolutely no down.
Yeah.
Why? Because the bias, because of the data sources.
Yeah.
So hacking again, looking in the codes, understanding how it works, why it works. An anecdote: students, I don't remember where, they were learning machine learning, so training machine learning algorithm. And what they were doing, they were trying to have a algorithm which would automatically detect a banana. So when they would put a banana in the frame, it would detect the banana. So people are not very they are bold. I don't know. What can I tell you? And it was very funny. So they were taking, they had a video, they were putting the banana, and then it was as fast as possible to detect it and giving them a light or whatever. And then it became super, super fast. And then they tried to look into the black box of the machine learning to see, what works. And they saw a neuron, like in the middle of the black box, that was super active and looked like it was very effective. And why? Because it became a face recognition algorithm, a face detection algorithm. Because the machine learning program quickly understood that when the face was coming in, the banana was coming just afterwards. So it became very good in detecting that face.
Yeah.
And it was, but if you don't know how it's coded, you really think it's working on the banana. No, it's working on the face. So yeah, hacking.
So the noises you might be hearing is us having some chocolates. And we are here in a bunker, and I'm sitting across from Patrice, that is wearing an amazing purple t-shirt that says Vatican Hacked Embassy. Maybe he wants to tell us something about that.
But the people cannot see the t-shirt, and the t-shirt is very there are not many of them, but very quickly, it's a story about big hacker events where I used to go. Well, even earlier, I used to co-organize them, and have become so big that people organize in villages of mind-alike people, all coming from a certain countries, and then it's called an embassy. A friend of mine was a long time part of the Italian embassy, but he got kicked out of the Italian embassy. So he started his own, which was a Vatican embassy, but Vatican embassy, that's a bit bizarre, so he put it hacked, Vatican hacked embassy. And he still went to these big Chaos Computer Club, German hackers organization, event with this t-shirt and bringing along better grappa than his Italian ex-friends who had kicked him out. That's the story of the t-shirt.
To just give you maybe a funny interlude, I remembered a book by an art critic from the US called David Hickey that is titled Pirates and Farmers, and I remember one of Lara's word mentioned was pirate, again, I guess in relationship to this weird idea of hacker. So David Hickey writes, I'm going to explain this to you very simply. All human creatures are divided into two groups. There are pirates and there are farmers. Farmers build fences and control territory. Pirates tear down fences and cross borders. There are good pirates and bad pirates, good farmers and bad farmers, but there are only pirates and farmers. They are very different kinds of creatures, and some pirates even recognize the importance of farmers. My late friend Roger Miller, a famous pirate, wrote this in a song after a visit with his tax attorney. Squares make the world go round, he wrote. Sounds profane, sounds profound, but government things can't be made do by hipster wearing rope-soled shoes.
It's a good one.
That's a nice one. Pirates are it's interesting that he makes the distinction between pirates and farmers, because a classical anthropological distinction is between nomads and farmers. And the problem is exactly the same, in the sense that pirates are nomads of the sea. And now we really move out of IT, but back into capitalism in a certain sense. David Graeber, who has an anarchist anthropologist, who is very famous for his book 5,000 Years of Debt, which is really a fundamental book, wrote, it's not very well known, also about pirates. And pirates are seen as in a certain sense, like hackers, as representative of democracy, horizontalism, sharing, knowledge seeking. And he's not the only one writing in that sense about pirates, because like many things in history, there are some accepted opinion about other period of times. A nice one is the Dark Ages. And as group, nice one is pirates, or there are also Templars, and well, quite a lot, which the mainstream has attributed generally a bad opinion to. But there is contrarian opinion, often backed by, if not facts, at least good evidence, that it can be seen differently, and then you get you get a conflict between people holding for the specialist, holding for the old opinion, and others holding for the new opinion. And Graeber, whose last book, not his last published book, his last unpublished book, that means not published in English language, but translated and published in Italian and in French, is about Libertalia, the story of pirates on the coast of Madagascar, the west coast, the east coast, no, the east coast of Madagascar, at the very end of the 17th, very beginning of the 18th century, having escaped the Caribbean because the Caribbean had become really pacified by mainstream powers, and restarting their allegedly very democratic, very horizontal, very sharing communities on the coast of Madagascar, being attacked by other specialists on pirates as projecting ideas of the 21st century into the history, whether everyone knows, or at least they knew, that pirates are really bad, and their societies were extremely cruel and extremely unequal and extremely aggressive, also among themselves. And this utopianism was absolutely out of bound. And the same kind of stories you have about pirates, or about nomads and farmers, or in the United States about Indians, cowboy and Indians. What's the mainstream idea of Indians? Well, it's not very good. They're very cruel culture. What is the revisionist story about Indians? It's that they are very good and very close to nature, and actually are pointing to our future. And so you have so many examples. And well, you have about the hacker story. You have exactly the same.
Yeah. Do you have any pirate stories for us?
It reminded me the fact that I mean, when at least I remember this for my courses of history about French history, when the king, when there was still a king in France, was using corsair, so pirates, specific format of pirates, which were allowed by the king to go out and ransom, rampage, steal, you name it. But it was covered because ordered. But at the same time, on their free days, they could also do some pirating for their own intent and their own. And the same is happening now. I mean, you have criminal groups that are working very close to state interests, or if they don't work close to state interest, at least state let them consciously operate. So it doesn't mean that they are complice, but at least they are clearly I close my eyes into what you're doing as long as you don't attack me or my interest.
Exactly.
And it's a situation that reminds me, what we could see in this old age, and the word pirate, rang that bell.
Yeah, I think I think it's a very good comparison, and then we get into states deliberately engaging into activities which endanger it endangers the internet, it endangers people become very vulnerable, and indeed these people having sidelines in I would think mostly in the ransomware department.
Yeah, there's
and
ransomware. There's other department. I mean, but something you just said, and just to be clear, I mean, it's not the only place where I would voice it, but I think it's critical point is that the insecurity on the internet is the responsibility of states, and not only of states because of regulation, etc. I'm talking about attacks. I'm talking about being behind attacks or letting attacks go. The responsibility of states is still not that guy in the hoodie in his garage or in her garage. No, that's not the culprit. It's states. When you see attacks on the scale of solar winds, or you see attack on the scale of, you see this market of surveillance that is not only allowed by states, but is purchased by states. You have companies like NSO putting this malware like Pegasus, where you can transform the phone of anyone in 0 click into a portable spy. This exists because these companies are not hiding. They're not, in the dark net somewhere. No. They have a building in the city. Everyone knows them. They spend millions in research and development, and each and every dollar, euro, penny that is sent there is against the internet, because it's to find holes in the internet and to exploit them against our common interest. And these companies exist because states let them exist first. Second, buy them products. And third, do not regulate how these products are exported in between states. So this is the highest level responsibility. Then we can talk about this script kiddie that is, playing with the network of the library next door. Okay, we can talk about this, but let's have a bit of,
Well, in Italy you had hacking team. Yeah, you have a few more, but it's. I was thinking about something which, as usual or as happens, I got lost into, and
I mean, to reply to the hacking team, that's because we started with that word. It's good to go back to it every time. Hacking team was an abuse of the word. I mean, the hacking team has nothing to do with hacking.
No.
So, I mean, it's not because you claim the word that it means that this is the activity that you're doing. They were just taking money to exploit vulnerability in the internet and to empower mass surveillance that, in a lot of cases, was going against human rights.
With the states were their principal clients, the state should have, in this case, the Italian state should have regulated them in selling, and that's what they pretend. And all these companies are pretending. No, we sell only to legitimate parties, democratic states, for purposes of combating criminality, and then in the end, it turns out that they sell to dictatorial regimes going after human rights activists.
Yeah. And who knows what the state is going to become tomorrow? I mean, you sell to a state today and you think that this state is democratic, and then suddenly something happens, and then it's not exactly the same state.
In our own. I'm very glad that you are saying this, because it reminds me something that's again pre-technology or pre-IT as we know it. It was the time of Tony Blair, who was Prime Minister of Great Britain, of the United Kingdom, who first Tony Blair and then his successor Brown, Gordon Brown, implemented extremely liberty-threatening laws. They were attacked on that. There was opposition with saying, but these are liberty-threatening laws. But we will only make good use of them. It will be only in the defense of democracy and the legitimate rule of law order. But when someone said that, yes, but you never know what can happen. Even Great Britain can become a dictatorship. Actually, there is a very good television program of the BBC, which ran 20 years ago or more, and then was shelved because too dangerous, too bad to think about it. Where you saw an extremely credible scenario of a government being elected into power, which was really not in the interest of.
What was this program you're mentioning?
Yeah, well, I'm trying. I can better describe it. It was the idea was a Labour-like popular politician became elected prime minister. Well, he got election gave him sufficient majority in parliament to govern, and he was implementing. This new prime minister was implementing policy which were clearly not in the interest of the powers that be. These were economic but also political and I would almost say cultural interest. And he was toppled by an intervention which portrayed his government as causing a situation which was endangering the existence of the state. And there was a kind of silent coup. And then things came back to normal. I can't even remember if he was assassinated or not or whatever. What it was in any case was the whole idea was that the government could be overturned in a fairly efficient, non too bloody manner. And then you can get a government, you can get an extremely repressive government having all the tools to, and that's what we have seen in the United States far more recently with Donald Trump. Donald Trump, I mean, it's a complete nightmare if this guy comes back. I tend to think he will not, but okay. Donald Trump was well on his way of implementing a completely different order in the United States, backed up by instruments of surveillance and control and repression, which were incredibly effective and no longer resistible. I mean, that's also a thing of technology. Quite often you hear the thing that, oh, if the Stasi only had the surveillance capacity that we have nowadays, it would never, the whole system would still be there. Optimists will say, no. There's this psalm which says, empire rise and fall. Everything that rises will come down. But meanwhile, it's quite frightening. It's a quite frightening prospect.
Yeah, for sure.
What about art in all of this?
Yeah.
What about art?
Well, this exhibition that it's on now here at Mudam tries to tackle with these complexities, and I think it's really hard for people, working with materials and ideas to be able to compress so much into a sculpture or a video or an installation, whatever it may be. I think what I'm asking myself is in this kind of political ecology, I think we talk a lot about interest, commerce, and financialization, that it's led by capitalism and by corporations. But I'm also personally very worried by the role culture doesn't play into this. And it's quite interesting if you analyze a bit also how Silicon Valley has been moving along. I think culture has really been one of the places they colonized quite early on, say with the project of Google, archiving, owning the rights of all these artworks with the idea that you could pixel by pixel, experience them on your computer, but at the same time, acquiring the possibility. The same with Bill Gates owning the Getty images, and I think also the paywalls around universities or academic papers. this idea of inaccessibility and kind of closing off rather than making shared, because everything needs to be a profit. So I don't know if you have any take on this, because I think culture is a bit always what is missing in this conversation, because it's easy to go to the technology or the effects. And also it's what is missing in political discussions, I mean, I'm taking the example of Italy with the lockdown. They invested a lot of money to restart the economy, and of course, there were huge problems in a lot of areas, health being, what was perceived, and it was the most pressing issue, but culture was always was not there, or was the very last step.
Same in France.
And I think this is a big problem, and I think empowerment to me is also this, having more access to information, and I think culture, or the right to culture, is a big part of that.
No, art is, there's something unique about art when it comes to these topics, is that there's the capacity for artists to give a story about the cyberspace with all these nuances. Doesn't have to be, I'm pro-technology, anti-technologies. Art, can transcend that. It can project to you into one single piece of art the complexity, the paradoxes, the opposition, and you can really. So I'm always very interested in when artists, are embracing this complex topic of cyber ethics, what this means for knowledge, what this means for the future of the generation, and trying, to vehicle a message. So that's why I was asking.
Yeah, and I think maybe what's interesting in how artists approach this is that they don't represent anyone but themselves. So they can really see through very different lenses, and with their research go in very different directions. So maybe that's what it's like infiltrating, spaces that are.
We last year we had an event. It was November last year for the first year of the institute, and we invited artists to produce some artwork. On what is cyber peace for them? What does it mean? And it was mind blowing. Yeah. Because you work on this every day, but you work on this under the lens of this is about attacks, about victims, about laws, about norms. So it frames, it's kind of super framed in my mind, and then someone comes and say, okay, what do you think?
Yeah, and maybe I'm generalizing and maybe romanticizing this a bit, but I think art has always had this capacity of imagining futures, and maybe the answer is somewhere there, or at least they can prospect things that are not on the horizon yet, just with their. And I think a lot of also the cracks, the problems, as you were saying, like the bias attached to algorithm, because they come from from intentions. I think there's really interesting artists developing work about that now, like in the exhibition, Martin Sims and Sandra Perry, how algorithm disregard black female bodies, and how, to take back that space and turn, I don't know, Siri or Alexa into a different kind of space. And
I would even top up on that. I think at the moment the artists are the last ones which are really are going quite far in understanding the whole issue, and are able to portray it. It's there's a book which is called The Great Offshore. We talked earlier about it, which is done by the Brin Collective, which is entirely written by artists, and they really explain far better than any academics I know the economics working of the situation we are now at the moment. The Great Offshore is about capitalism outsourcing itself in various locations, like what we've known as tax paradises, and so, and it's quite fantastic. And there are many instances of that. And the reason why you were saying is that they are independent. They are not involved They are not how you call it.
They don't have a specific
Stage.
agenda.
Not
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
specific, but this
Yeah.
is. You should watch out because this is changing. Also, the whole artistic cultural field is now falling prey under this what I call the certification mechanism and the authorization thing that they also arts are going to be framed, are going to be enclosed in the system. I see it in for instance in the Netherlands in two fields that artists are encouraged, and encouraged is you should read for encouraged more or less forced or nudged as it is told now to go for a PhD, which is the absolute example of a certification paper on one hand, and on the other hand to behave like entrepreneurs, so to become cultural entrepreneurs as it is called, which is a way to include them in the monetary capitalist system. But for the moment, as far as they are resisting, and when I was in academia, I was noticing that theory was going out of academia in favor of basically money bringing in practical projects in development, in the field of development, again between brackets, in which I was. It's very obvious because the department was basically functioning as a knowledge resource base for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and of Development things. And theories was going out. Critical theory of development, in my case, in our case, was going out. But theory was moving to art schools because they were still independent. They were still outside the system. I don't know if it's still the case. I'm very afraid that if you go to an art school these days, that they will say, "Oh, no, but this kind of field is no longer financed, is no longer supported."
Well, I mean, it's been a while also for me, but I sympathize with what you're saying, because when I was like studying in London, I went to Goldsmiths, which you know prides itself as being a hotbed for theory and thinkers, and it was quite interesting because you know they kind of really cherish their independence. And what happened as a student, you have this, you know, kind of badge of honor that you graduated from there, but then you're on your own, and then you know the colleagues from the other school that it's much more connected to institutions. They were the one getting the jobs or the internship, you know. So there's also that reality, and I think. You know, artists have always been infiltrating spaces that are more, kind of borderless. But you know, even in the 60s, there was in the UK the artist placement group, and they were going into factories and you know, like learning or making the other like forget about you know the kind of tailorist way of production. And nowadays like Silicon Valley does residencies for artists, and artists go there because they probably get 5 times the money they would get from a residency in a museum or you know an institution, you know, and the tools in a different way. So it's a very complex world to navigate as pirates or farmers. Well, I don't know what you think, but
I think we covered quite some ground.
yeah.
It's 5:43 now.
And there's still so much ground to be covered. And there are so many things to be discussed. But
Nice conversation. Very nice.
Yeah. So
Is
if everyone agrees, we or
this,
you would-
maybe I can plug something, because you were quite at the beginning talking in terms of empowering people, and that's what your institution is doing. There are many more institutions doing that, fortunately. I hope you also federate and know about each other. I was, for instance, with the Tactical Technology Collective, which started as, that was when I was advocate of free and open source software, as I call it. And there's a group in Italy which is called Circe, which is doing exactly that. They are giving classes to people. You know them?
Internet Mon Amour, yes, I know this one.
So you know this one, huh? You know, but you know the group as well.
The group, no,
It's
no, I know the book.
it is, and it's all about going to the people, going to classes in school and so, and explaining how technology
That's
works, and telling kids, 14 years old kids, okay, you have a smartphone. Do you know how it works? Well, it does this and this and that. Oh, and if you do this, this and that happens. Ooh. And you don't use apps. Well, yeah, maybe some apps you can maybe use, but maybe others less so, because this and this and that is happening. And there are, and it's yeah. That
And for the listeners out there, the book is Agnese Trocchi, Internet Mon Amour, Chronicles Before Yesterday's Collapse. And there's a heart on the cover, a heart that it's technological in scope, I guess.
yeah. Yeah, that's empowering, making people attaining technological sovereignty.
Yeah.
That's a bit. That's our hope.
And it takes time, but it takes also like willingness and again ambition from education program. And everyone, also around school that wants to help. In another life, I wrote a play for that. That was played a lot in schools, in fact, to give like a really hands-on story about what is happening when you just let go, when you let technology drives everything, and then you just let go, and it works with kids. You always think that there's no interest, privacy is a value that they don't believe in anymore, whatever. It's not true at all. It's even the contrary. I mean, it's quite. I guess there's this kind of a misunderstanding about the millennials and the Z generation, whatever it's called now, that they are like because they're digital natives, they understand digital. It's absolutely untrue. It's very wrong.
Totally untrue.
They have been raised to be, in fact, manipulated by digital means, and without really taking the time understanding how it works.
Yeah,
But it doesn't mean that they don't have the capacity to or the curiosity to understand how it works.
well, they've been raised as consumers, but you can make them producers. And you can make them producers not by imposing programs, by imposing curricula, and so. You can make them producers by explaining and by being an example, and by facilitating them. And so I'm
Especially because you see there's the sometimes the meme, the meme generation makes me think about this. It's kind of hacking of the content. Like the content that is passing by, and you have this glimpse of joke and smartness to transform this content into something super fast, super fun for the whole community. Then what was originally the content is transformed into something else, and then it gets a distance. So you understand that suddenly people get a distance in what is presented to them, so it shows a bit of self-criticism also. And so it's there. It's really there. We should not mistake this generation to be blind consumer.
No.
But as long as they've got an ambition to make them like really informed consumer and to help them,
exactly.
what can you hope?
Great. And
Is there a password for us to escape, or how does it work?
I don't know. Get
Escape
us
from
out
the
of the bunker.
Oh, this the ghost is behind us.
Of course, it's behind us.